Now, Iran has carried out an airborne attack against Israel, launching over 200 drones as part of what it calls Operation True Promise. Iran says ballistic missiles have also been fired here. These are the first visuals that we have of the missiles fired by Iran, a barrage of objects seen flying through the night sky over Bethlehem from Iran and headed towards Israel. Sirens were activated in Jerusalem at around 1:45 a.m. local time. Loud explosions were heard, with the air defense systems shooting down objects over the city. The multiple interceptors lit up the night sky here. As air raid sirens ring out, the Israeli Defense Forces have assured people that the aerial defense array is fully operational and is intercepting threats wherever required. An alert has been raised that people may hear explosions from interceptions or debris falling. And reacting to the attack by Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has looked to reassure citizens that the country is ready for every scenario. This as he underscored that Israel would hit back and defeat its enemies.
Citizens of Israel in recent years and especially in recent weeks, Israel has been preparing for a direct attack on Iran. Our defensive systems are deployed. We are ready for any scenario, both defensively and offensively. The state of Israel is strong. The Israel Defense Forces is strong. We have determined a clear principle. Whoever harms us, we will harm them. We will defend ourselves against any threat and will do so level-headedly and with determination. Citizens of Israel, I know that you are also level-headed. I call on you to follow the directives of the IDF Home Front Command. Together, we will overcome all our enemies.
Now, Iran has named the attack Operation True Promise. An Iranian military statement confirms that the attack is in retaliation for Israel's repeated crimes, including the 1st of April attack on the Iranian consulate, which Iran has blamed entirely on Israel. It says it will strike again if Israel retaliates, citing Article 51 of the UN Charter of its attack. The message from Iran reads, I'm quoting here, "The matter can be deemed concluded." However, should the Israeli regime make another mistake, Iran's response will be considerably more severe. It's a conflict between Iran and the rogue Israeli regime from which the United States must stay away. Article 51 of the UN Charter says that member states have the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs. US President met his national security team for an update on Iran's attacks against Israel. He reiterated the United States' commitment to Israel's security against threats from Iran and its proxies, that's saying that its support for them is ironclad. Now, a group of hardline supporters of the Iranian government gathered overnight in central Tehran to celebrate the country's missile and drone attacks against Israel. Protesters waved flags of Palestine and Lebanese Hezbollah and chanted "Death to Israel" and "Death to America." Remember, Iran launched dozens of drones and ballistic missiles towards Israel in an unprecedented revenge mission that pushed the Middle East ever closer to a region-wide war. The attack marks the first time Iran had ever launched a direct military assault on Israel, despite decades of enmity dating back to the country's 1979 Islamic Revolution. As you can see, these are the visuals that are coming in. As I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of hardliners who celebrated the missile attacks by Iran on Israel. These are the visuals that we are getting. These are the visuals, as you can see, on the petrol pump here. These are the visuals that are coming in from Tehran. As you can see, long queues outside of petrol stations here. For more on this, we're now being joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani from New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, let's go back to the Article 51 that Iran has invoked in its statement as well. It has said that now the matter can be deemed concluded. What do you have to say about that, Susan? Do you think Iran has tried to really go by the book here to justify its actions and its retaliatory strikes, at least that's what it claims, on Israel?
Iran took a very, very heavy risk by launching this attack from its own soil against Israel. And this statement by the Iranian mission to the UN seems like Iran at this point wants an off-ramp, kind of saying that, you attacked us, we retaliated, let's, call it a day. But it's yet to be seen whether or not Israel will let this go, considering the fact that prior to the attack, everyone expected that Iran would use one of its proxies and not directly attack Israel from its soil, which was a red line essentially for Benjamin Netanyahu, who said that Israel would retaliate very strongly should Iran do that. So in Iran's eyes, even though this may be, a one-time thing done, a retaliation, again, it's yet to be seen how the United States and Israel will react. And again, there has been multiple explosions in the sky over Israel, and what those are, we're trying to still figure out, whether they were missiles, were they intercepted, and fragments of the missiles that fell. But all of that, really, the Israeli war room, and also here, the Situation Room with President Biden and his administration, they're all taking all of this into consideration to see what the next steps would be.
All right, Susan, do stay on with us. For more on this, we're also now being joined by John Erath, who is a Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, sir. Of course, these attacks, something that Israel had been bracing itself for in the past week. What do you make of the attack and in the manner that this was carried out? As I was speaking to Susan about this as well, Iran, in fact, it's invoked Article 51 of the UN Charter as well. It's really trying to cover all bases here to justify its strikes on Israel. What do you make of this?
I think that Susan was right. The significant thing is that the attack came from Iran itself. In the past, when they have attacked Israel and Israeli interests, it has been through the use of proxies, such as Hamas and Hezbollah. This was a direct attack from the armed forces of one nation against the territory and people of another. That represents a significant escalation, and it's something that I think was done quite intentionally on the part of the Iranian government.
All right. That being said, what would they stand to gain from doing that? Because, as Susan said, this is a risk for Iran to carry out these strikes from Iranian soil.
I think Iran found itself in the position where they had made threats to retaliate against Israel for the attack on their consulate, and they felt that they had to do something. This was the option they chose. It was an option to escalate the situation, and it carries the risk that it could make the violence in the region worse.
All right, but that being said, of course, Iran in its statement mentioned as well, this can be deemed concluded. Do you think that really is the case? Do you think this is what the response was limited to?
I hope that this is going to be concluding the cycle of escalation. Israel has also said that it would consider some sort of response to what the Iranians have done. But I think we need to watch very carefully how this plays out. And it's the responsibility of governments the world over to urge both parties to stay away from further escalation.
Right.
I think it is helpful that the attacks from Iran were, by all reports so far, rather unsuccessful.
All right. Well, sir, let's just bring our correspondent Susan Tehrani back into this conversation. Now, Susan, of course, there was a letter that was given to the President of the UN Security Council regarding the attack as well. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was from Israel's ambassador to the United Nations calling for an immediate meeting of the council for council members to condemn Iran's actions and for them to condemn Iran as a terrorist entity. How far the council will go in doing that is yet to be seen, but the meeting is likely to happen sooner than later, considering the fact that this is not only a tense situation between Israel and the and Iran at this point, but then the United States as well. We've heard that the U.S. has intercepted and shot down a number of drones coming towards Israel from Iran. And also, the international community, the Europeans, they really don't have an appetite, of course, who does, for a wider conflict in the region. But I think it will also be interesting considering the path that the Security Council has taken so far in somewhat isolating Israel, and Israel only having the United States to back it at the Security Council, whether or not at this point they're going to put more pressure on Israel to try to put a lid on its operations in Gaza as well, which would be very unfair for the Israelis, of course.
All right, Mr. Arad, coming back to you now, just based on what Susan has said as well, and I'm going to quote the statement that's come out of Iran. They've asked categorically that the United States must stay away. So how do you assess the United States' role? It has said that its support for Israel is ironclad, but to what extent do you think the United States would or could get involved in this?
The reports that I have seen are that U.S. forces, particularly naval forces in the Mediterranean, have been involved in shooting down some of the missiles and drones that were sent to attack Israel and Israeli military bases. So the U.S. role to this point is defensive and is protective and is trying to minimize the damage and the casualties that these attacks are causing.
All right. For more on this, we're also now being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast right now. Of course, Siddhant, you know what has happened, the manner in which the attacks were carried out by Iran on Israel from the Iranian soil, of course. As Susan and I, Mr. Rath and I were discussing, that appears to be a big risk as well. In terms of the diplomatic situation at the moment, what is your assessment, Siddhant?
Well, essentially, we know that it's been some hours since the attack started, and we have seen remarks coming from across the world. Now, New Delhi has woken up. It's almost 7:30 a.m. in India. What will be Indian reaction is something that will be closely watched. India has good relationship with both Israel and with Iran. India had issued advisories just on Friday to its citizens as well. And in fact, yesterday only the incident came where a commercial vessel, which had 17 Indians, was seized by the Iranian forces. Now, essentially, India has two big worries in West Asia when if the situation becomes much worse. It's already bad right now. First, of course, the big diaspora. India has a huge diaspora in the region. A large number of blue-collar workers work in West Asian region. Approximately 10,000 Indians are in Iran, and approximately 18,000 Indians are in Israel. In fact, a batch of Indians left for Israel as workers recently in the construction sector. So that remains the big worry. The second, of course, is the energy. India sources large quantities of energy from countries like Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Will there be an impact on infrastructure is something that impacts India's energy dependency on that part of the world. So it will be something that India will be closely watching, and India has huge stakes in the region.
Right. Siddhant, just for more clarity on this, I want to go back to what's happened yesterday where the vessel was seized by the IRGC. Multiple nationalities, people from multiple nationalities were captured as well. Do we have any details of that?
Well, so far we know that the things stand where they stand. Yesterday evening, it's in the custody of the Iranian forces. India has reached out to Tehran over the development. This is a worrisome development. In fact, there are approximately 25 crew members on board that vessel, of which 17, that's the biggest amount, are the Indians. So far, India has been reaching out to Tehran, but in the fog of war, it looks like a difficult task right now as the West Asian region plunges into one of the worst catastrophe in years.
Right. Mr. Arad, coming back to you now, I just wanted to get some more clarity on this. With what has happened this morning, how does this direct fight between Israel and Iran impact the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas?
Obviously, it is another escalation, but it's all part of the same conflict. Hamas is a client of Iran. They act in the Iranian interests, and to some extent, we don't know exactly what extent, but they do take orders from Tehran. So it is quite possible that the attacks in October that started the current conflict were done at the suggestion or order of the Iranian government. And so the greater escalation and widening of the conflict represents a real threat to peace in the region and a real risk to all of the countries in West Asia.
All right, we were earlier joined by Professor Burstein as well, and he agrees that the ball is now in Israel's court, and it really is up to Israel as to how it reacts, and this may just be the point where Israel pivots and decides that it cannot go on with its operations in Gaza or elsewhere. What is your take on this? Do you think that would be the case?
It is clearly now up to Israel to decide how it will respond to the latest round of attacks. It is possible, if it does turn out that most of the missiles were intercepted, that Israel could just declare that it has won and turn away from any further retaliation. The situation in Gaza will be dictated by what is happening on the ground now. The humanitarian catastrophe is something that Israel is having a great deal of trouble explaining away, and they are sensitive to the implications of further military action. So I think before this latest round, we were seeing signs that they were considering scaling back the violence and allowing greater humanitarian supplies to go through. And I hope that that's the decision they would come to.
All right, Susan, coming back to you now, of course, as we were discussing earlier as well, US President Joe Biden was having a meeting with the national security team as well to discuss the plan of action going forward. Is there any word on that?
Well, we're not going to be hearing anything from President Biden tonight, at least. If we're going to hear anything on camera, it will likely be tomorrow if. But we do know, as you mentioned, that they're meeting right now. And, you know, there has been some criticism leveled against the president from his critics and Republicans that, you know, he wasn't strong enough and he wasn't aggressive enough against the Islamic Republic of Iran, unfreezing Iranian assets, trying to get back to the nuclear deal, and not supporting sanctions at the United Nations for its missile and drone programs as well. So, you know, in an election year, all eyes are on the president to see how he's going to be handling the situation and this conflict in the region, which Saddam mentioned, really is something we haven't seen in decades. So, you know, they're meeting, they're going to be assessing the situation. I think what's really important to note is that the United States, you know, knowing President Biden trying to take the least confrontational approach, which apparently, you know, many believe that in this case may be a good thing, has asked Israel to discuss any kind of retaliatory measures before Israel does decide to carry out those against Iran, if it does. Now, whether or not Benjamin Netanyahu would heed to those calls, considering the fact that the relationship between the two have been icy recently, is yet to be seen. We do know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden we're expected to have a phone conversation tonight.
All right. Well, Susan and Mr. Thank you so much for joining us. Siddhant, thank you for joining with all the updates as well. Thank you so much for your time. For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.